All right, well, I wanted to make this video. I wanted to talk about the discussion that's gotten talked about a good amount, and I feel like it's a discussion worth having, which is Jonathan Taylor an MVP candidate? Should he win MVP? You see a lot of people kind of really quickly dismissing, oh no, he's a running back, he could never win it. But I think that there is an argument you could make for Jonathan Taylor. I don't think it's out of the question. First, what we have to do, though, before anything else, is just figure out what we believe the MVP should be. What is MVP? How did we define it? What is the wording we're going to use throughout the rest of this video and throughout the rest of this discussion? And to me, it's simple. The award is MVP, Most Valuable Player. Which player added the most value to their team? And I think the best way to think about it is if you replaced that player with a replacement level player, so basically just someone you would sign off the streets, someone you would maybe call up from the practice squad, not like just a random person, but like, a random NFL player who isn't very good, how much would the team struggle because of that? How different would that be? I think that's a fair way to determine value. That's the way Billy Beane did it in Moneyball. So that's kind of my philosophy on it as well. So that's what we're going to do. That's how we've decided this is going to work. That's what makes sense in my head. I think the obvious thing people would point out is a running back just can't be as valuable as a quarterback. And to some degree, that's true. Like there will, if a quarterback has a great season, it's always going to be more valuable than having even in a Hall of Fame running back. That's just, undoubtedly true. But how true is it? I mean, we're assuming this, but what data can we use to prove this? And the number one thing I can think about is when I did a study on positional value using Pro Football Focus grades to determine where you ranked in that specific grade, how many wins would that typically equate to. For a star quarterback, it was around 4 wins, just for the quarterback play, nothing else included. It's going to give you a little bit over 4 wins projected. For running backs, I had to do it a little bit differently, but the way I did it with running backs was I basically just arbitrarily said, these are this is how I'm going to rank each running back room, which is a little different because I didn't love the PFF grading system, largely due to the fact that I think that a lot of a running back's value is how they set things up for the offense, how they set things up in the passing game. I think that matters a lot. Teams play Derrick Henry differently, which allows you to set stuff up. Teams play Jonathan Taylor differently, which is where a lot of his value comes from. So that's the way I did it. And for that, it meant that a top 5 running back usually was worth about 2.5 wins. So we're talking a little over 4 wins to 2.5 wins. There's a pretty big disparity there, but it's not crazy. And you can picture a scenario where the best running back in football would be more valuable than the best quarterback in football in a specific year if things went perfectly. I mean, you can easily think of a scenario of that, right? Like, let's think about, I don't know, let's say there's a game, let's just view one game, for example, where Jonathan Taylor ends up having a monster day where he breaks a bunch of tackles and adds like 150 yards to the offense, gets a couple touchdowns, and because of this, this now means that he added, 10 points or whatever to the team above expected. Meanwhile, the quarterbacks didn't have a great day, did not add that much. We can totally picture a scenario where this could happen through 17 games. Unlikely, but it could happen. So it is possible, and I think I made a chart that I think might make this a little bit easier to understand. So these 2 bars here, what they represent is, let's say the red bar is running back and the blue bar is quarterbacks, and this is the average value that you'll typically get from the best of each position each year. So the red bar, that's a typical best running back season, gives you that much value, whereas for the blue bar, a typical quarterback MVP season typically gives you that much value. I should mention, this is not to scale, it's just to use as an example. Well, let's just say, for example, that the halfback of this season had a much better year than a typical best halfback season. Something like that, really good season, one of the best seasons of all time. This is, Adrian Peterson 2,000-yard season, something like that, where it's just, okay, that was an incredible year. You added a ton of value to this. Even with that, it's unlikely that it's even going to get past the average best quarterback season in the NFL. But as we've kind of talked about, this year there wasn't a clear MVP favorite for a while, and there still kind of isn't. So you could make the argument, well, no one's really been a front runner, so that blue bar also doesn't have as much value as it typically does. Let's say this year it's like that, where you see that there's a drop off, and in fact, because of this, now you can see that there is a slight edge and the halfback does deserve the MVP. So even though it's very rare for this to happen, it could happen, and it doesn't seem that outrageous that it has happened, and you could even argue this season is an example of it happening. However, let's go back to that 2.5 wins number for a halfback, because people are going to disagree on that. I've looked PFF has a WAR grading system, and typically the way they do it is the elite halfbacks only get about 0.5 wins in a season, where I have 2 wins higher than that, that's a huge difference. I mean, that's just a massive difference. So what's the reason behind that? And, again, there's a lot of ways to talk about this, and it's really complicated. How valuable is a running back? I don't know if there is a right answer, but let's sort of use several different numbers. First, this one. So Jonathan Taylor, 448 rushing yards over expected. This can kind of give you an idea of how much actual tangible value is he adding to the team. This is using next-gen stats for this, and it's fascinating. It doesn't seem that high, right? We would assume a quarterback has a much bigger, over passing yards over expected than just 448, but that's what it says. And if you're using this, it kind of can be actually a pretty big hindrance in the Jonathan Taylor MVP argument. Let's look at Jonathan Taylor's total EPA. This is 22.3 total estimated points added, which would give him a WAR of just 0.6, which isn't very high. But I think that there's an interesting thing to talk about here. For one thing, the way I calculated this could be a bit off. I took the average EPA per play from the Colts this year and then times that with how many snaps Taylor has had, or I should say how many carries Jonathan Taylor has had. That's not exactly fair to do that, I don't think, for a couple of reasons. One, other guys have ran the football and probably bring that average a little bit down, so it's probably a little bit higher than that. And plus, there's other ways that Taylor adds value, right? He sets things up in the passing game. Because of the threat of Taylor, teams aren't going to play cover 2, and now Carson Wentz can push the ball down the field easier, and a weaker receiving core can have more success. All that stuff is very true, but there's also one more kind of issue I have with this exact stat. And it's that while we compare quarterback EPA versus running back EPA, the difference is that having positive EPA as a running back is hard to do just in general. Just that alone is an accomplishment, because usually EPA goes down when you run the ball. Typically, conventional football strategy is you run the ball to set up the pass. That's how you want stuff to work. So already just having positive EPA is an accomplishment. So what it might be better to do is, instead of just looking at how much value are you adding this way, how much EPA are you adding compared to replacement level, right? Going back to, that's what we determine value as. Where is Jonathan Taylor ranking if you compare him to the worst rushing teams in the league? Then it jumps up all the way to this, 91.78 estimated points added over replacement level. So this is a much bigger jump, and it's now 2.3 wins above replacement. So that's a huge jump, and it's a lot closer to my number of 2.5 than like PFF's number of just 0.5. And again, there's a lot of disagreements, and what's the fairest way to go about it? I don't know. I think it's a tough question, quite frankly. Like, you could certainly even make the argument of, okay, well, Jonathan Taylor's getting a lot of carries, and so part of the reason why his EPA over replacement level is so high is because of, teams that are horrible at it don't run the ball as much, and, it's not really fair to give him that much more value per snap. You could totally make that argument. I think that that's totally reasonable and probably is fair to some degree. Also, the other argument is, and it should be mentioned with EPA, it's not really factoring in, it's not taking into account the fact that, like, Taylor has an offensive line who can run block well. So that also comes into play a little bit, is Taylor's getting all the credit for stuff other guys are doing. But again, the flip side is, of course, just the threat of Jonathan Taylor. Having Jonathan Taylor means that you have to play him differently. That is a very real thing in football. Even though you can't measure it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So how valuable is a Jonathan Taylor? It really kind of goes back to my do you feel like Jonathan Taylor is having an exceptional season comparative to the rest of football, right? Because I think to make the argument Jonathan Taylor should be an MVP, you have to make the argument that Jonathan Taylor isn't just the best running back in football, he's having an exceptional season on top of that. And is that the case? And that answer is kind of, I would say, yeah, probably. I mean, he's been really good. You look at his EPA, again, keeping with that, it's at 0.075 per rush, which is very high for a rush. You have to go back to the 2010 Patriots, really, to find a team that was better than that. An asterisk is the 2011 Panthers were better, and also both the 2019 and 2020 Ravens were better, but they all had part of that value with a rushing quarterback, which can allow for more EPA per rush, whereas for a team like the Colts, they're mostly relying on their running back. So because of that, I would say that, yeah, I think you can make the argument this is that historic running back season a little bit. So was Derrick Henry last year. Derrick Henry was just slightly below Taylor, but still, I think you can make the argument that he is better. But of course, there's two sides of the coin. It's not just is Jonathan Taylor having an incredible season? It's also, are the quarterbacks having a down year? That has to be included. Both have to be part of it. You can't just have a great, I don't think it's possible for a running back to have like a 5-WAR season. I think maybe it's possible. We've never seen something like that happen. I think it would need some rule changes for it to really happen. But could it, has the quarterback play been down this year? Well, let's go back to EPA per play, right? Let's use the same statistic and try to make it as close as possible. And you're going to see the answer is not really. These are the top 5 players in terms of total EPA. So the column on the left is how many points they've added. Column on the right, how many wins they've added. So Mahomes is currently number 1, which is a surprise to me. But, part of it is he's thrown the ball a lot more than Rodgers. But still, he's added 3.59 wins. Rodgers just below at 3.52. You didn't have Brady a little bit lower, Josh Allen a little bit lower, and Justin Herbert a little bit lower as well. I also want to note, I did not do what I did with Jonathan Taylor, where, with Jonathan Taylor, I compared him to the bottom of the league. With these quarterbacks, I haven't done that. So if I did, you'd probably be looking at, for Mahomes, he'd be around 5.5 to 6 wins above replacement, which is just a huge difference. So basically, that's my point. And even if you want to argue, okay, well, I think that the supporting cast around, because again, EPA doesn't factor in supporting cast, so you could totally make the argument that Mahomes has all these weapons around him. Tom Brady has all these weapons around him. Even Aaron Rodgers, you could say he has Devontae Adams. Well, then what about Josh Allen, who still has 3.22 wins above replacement? He's almost a full win ahead of Jonathan Taylor in that category with a couple games left. And I'm not even counting the fact that it probably should be higher than that if I'm going to use it the same way I use Jonathan Taylor, of comparing you to the worst in the league instead of just to 0 EPA, which is league average. That's probably more fair to do. So I just think it's a really hard argument to make that Jonathan Taylor should be MVP. It's unfortunate. You could argue there should be a different award. I would argue there kind of is, like Offensive Player of the Year kind of is that award of the best offensive player, but, not really taking into account positional value. I think that's the case. I think it's a fun discussion to have, but that's kind of where I land on this whole Jonathan Taylor MVP thing. But again, do find it very fascinating, and maybe you guys disagree. Maybe you think there's added value with Jonathan Taylor that I'm not taking into account. Maybe I should be, doing the 2.3 WAR for Jonathan Taylor, plus adding an extra couple of wins because of the value he adds with Carson Wentz. But I just think that's tough. I really do. I think that, to me, the MVP should probably either be, I think you can make an argument for Mahomes. I think you can make an argument for Rodgers. I think you can make an argument for Allen. I'd probably lean Rodgers at this point, but again, it's tough. But that's what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.